Bisley, ladies and gentlemen. Yay! We flew him in from London, and boy, is his arms tired. All right, next we have Frank Frazetta Jr., the eldest offspring of the great artist Frank Frazetta and the head of the Frazetta Museum in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. Next we have Kenneth Smith. Kenneth Smith is well known for his creepy and eerie magazine covers in the 70s, his own magazine, Phantasmagoria, and he has an unbelievable resume. He has doctorates. He's highly intelligent. He's amazingly intelligent to put up with clowns like us. Yeah. Well, you define yourself.
Arthur is now known as the great zombie artist. But those of us who are long in the tooth remember his work before he became known for walking cadavers. And in those days, we were amazed with his ability with a brush and line. And there were definitely, he brought kind of there's a new wave in the early issues of heavy metal that he was working in. But then he took his work into some children's book too, beautiful Brer Rabbit, beautiful children's book. But he took a line that he had picked up largely from Frank and maybe Bernie Wrightson, sure. And he took that into new areas, with his own creative characters he created, or whether he was applying it to traditional children's books, sure. And things like that. Sure. So if you only know Arthur for his zombies, it's well worth looking into, a little earlier in his career, and that's really why I so desperately wanted him to be part of this panel, much to his complaints.
Well, I was introduced to Frank's work when I was about, 16 years old, and I was in a bookshop, and I was just stopped in my tracks. Just saw a little book, and it was The Barbarian, the famous one, The Barbarian, with a woman at his feet. I was stunned. Absolutely, that changed my life. Totally changed my life. I knew the direction I was going. So since then, he's been a huge influence. But I don't want to go on myself. Hey, Bob. Hey there, brother. See you tonight for drinks. The thing about Frank's work that always gets me is that it always looks fresh. You can look at it and look at it and look at it again. And next time you don't look at it, look at it again. There's always a wow factor. It's always There's so many the little neons in there. You rediscover it all the time. There's things you can look at the painting for years, and suddenly you find something else in it. And Frank always said that. What's interesting about my work, Frank said about his work, was that there's nothing boring about it. Every little square inch has something interesting going on. And how he created the atmosphere was quite remarkable. And it's enough said, man. Enough said. And I'm very glad that I had the opportunity to meet him and work with him in some capacity. So I'm very honoured by that, totally. There you go. Next.
That was erotic.
Erotic, yeah, that was Death Eater I worked with, yeah. And Franken said to me, Simon, he says, what are those? He said, try and make the arms look like 15-inch or 18-inch, but not like 35-inch biceps. He said, tone it down a little bit. But nah, I got nothing to say about it. It's an emotional thing. Just like his work's a spiritual, emotional thing. And to talk about it is just making up words for the sake of making up words and saying it, Just his work speaks for itself. I mean, what a remarkable man having your service.
I find it kind of ironic because, Frank had this kind of classicism in him. And he did have he was largely self-taught, but he did have some training when he was very young in Brooklyn. And his teacher there recognized the classicism and the potential as a fine artist and wanted to send him to Italy to study in some of the finest fine art schools in Italy. That fell through, but he went he loved comics and he followed a different track and created something totally new with his Barbarian thing. But he kind of exaggerated, but I find it ironic that you took the exaggeration a little further. And then he tried to get you to tone it back toward what he was doing. Whereas with other people, he would say, don't try to do it like me. Find your own way. But, he liked what you did. That was a little bit. Sometimes he'd see people and he'd say, like Jeff Jones. He appreciated Jeff Jones' painting ability, but sometimes he'd say, hey, he needs to pump it up a little bit more like me.
Where to start? A little insight about my father. He wasn't a pusher to his art. It was a way to make a living, as simple as that. I remember back as far as maybe 2 years old, his paintings starting at night, waking up in the morning, and the painting was finished. Many of his masterpieces were done with a softball game or a stickball game in between it. He'd be more than glad to stop right in the middle of it to play stickball till it's dark, because he said we'd come back and the painting would be fresh to him. What separates his art, which is a major advantage to him over a lot of other artists, he lived a lot of what he painted in his art. He was very athletic. He knew what the human body was capable of doing without going overboard and making it exaggerated to where it's not believable. He ever said he tried to compose a painting as an orchestrated musical art, and he'd say, make the unbelievable believable, and it pretty much is. And like Simon said, I run the museum with my wife, and at the end I'd like everybody to give her an applause because she's the one who really put her heart and soul into it. She became a bigger fan than I did. Protect her.
Frazetta.
Turn off the mic. And so, I forgot what I was doing. I'm getting too old for this. So, what was I talking about?
He was athletic.
Yeah, he was athletic. That is, you can edit that. So, then he tried to teach me how to paint in about 1975 to 80. And the first thing he gave me was the anatomy book. He said, here, copy every page in here and come back when you see what you did. And I got through like 3 pages, and I was like, Dad, I just can't do this. He goes, why can't you do it? I said, I did the arm like this, and I twisted, and the biceps totally changed. He goes, well, put a little time into it. You're going to be like me in a day? I said, it'd be nice. But it doesn't work that way. So he told me if I gave him 2 years of my time and total dedication, he'd say I could be as good as him. I mean, I had genetics and the genes to follow. I understood color, concept, design, but what I lacked was the motivation. Because just to be compared to my dad. I mean, my dad was extremely sensitive, whether people knew that or not. I mean, he'd take things to heart, but he kept it inside. He wouldn't show any emotions, but you didn't want to get on his bad side either. I mean, I've seen him mad a few times in my life, and I mean, it would take a lot. He was kind of like a simmering volcano. He'd sit there, but when it's time, look out. But he was a fantastic individual as far as artist, friend, father, unbelievable father. My dad and I were like this till the day he died. I mean, art was not important to him. He much more enjoyed doing the pencils, pen and inks. That was fun, he said. The oil paintings he was well known, became a lot of pressure, he said. And a lot of the art that I looked at, and I always asked him, what was your best painting? He said, all of them. But there were some of them that you look at and said, well, that's okay. And he came to the realization that it wasn't a heartfelt painting because he was basically dictated by a publisher to do something that they wanted to, like the painting called Sounds. I mean, I remember he came to me in my room, I was about 20 years old or 15, he goes, they want me to do sounding. What the hell am I supposed to do with that? How am I supposed to paint sound? So I started throwing a few things at him. He wasn't sure, and he came back the next day, he did a battleship of some sort, of guy with like a trumpet or... And so I said, you see paintings like that? I said, that's not one of the better Frazettas. It's because he was paid to do something that, it's not something that was appealing to him. That's probably Mom just saying, hey, we need some more cash flow, let's get going. So, but Mom was the agent that really pushed him. Now, as far as the museum goes, my wife and I have been working since around 2013, 2014 to get it back on the map. You know, we went through a lot with the settlement after Mom and Dad died with the siblings. That's all in the past. Everything's fine now. We're working with Dave. Everything that we do and anything that we purchase, you know, comes directly to the museum to keep the legacy alive. That's really the most important thing for us. I mean, right now it's still just simmering to get along. It's just a matter of time. But we want the world to know that we are working hard to keep this thing alive. My wife here, she's just dedicated to it. From the minute she gets up to the minute she goes to bed, she's just, right, Laura? She doesn't stop. She doesn't stop. It's hard because my whole life I had a career for 30 years, and then when it all came to an end, and I had to start fresh again with the museum. I'm 61 years old now, she's 57. It's not easy to start a new business at that age, but it's what, my mom and dad wanted that, was to honor their last wishes. And, I thank everybody for coming. And if you ever get a chance to come out, you get a personal tour, and we'd be more than happy to see everybody. But I thank everybody for coming. And I take any questions when we're done as well.
I want to reiterate that a lot of people know the Frazetta paintings are worth a fortune, and the values just keep going up. I did a study and an appraisal a handful of years ago of the entire history of every Frazetta sale that has ever been, going back to the earliest Russ Cochran auctions to the most recent heritage auctions, all-star auctions, everything in between. And it's blue chip stock. It is consistently gone up. On rare occasion, you might see something that somebody missed when it came up for auction, may go for a hair less, but generally, it just keeps going up. A number of pieces have now gone for over $1 million. One of the first $1 million sale was during Frank's life. It is almost unheard of for an artist to see one of their works go for $1 million within their own lifetime. But I really want to show a lot of respect to Frank Jr. for trying to keep the art together so that everyone can go see it.
Well, I agree with what Frank Jr. was saying, that for some of us artists who were big Frank fans, I was a huge Frank fan. I considered him my mentor, even though I asked him to give me drawing lessons and painting lessons at some point. At which point he said, I don't want to train anybody, because I trained somebody one time and then it came back to bite me on the rear end, so I don't want to do that. So what I took that as, okay, so I'll learn what I need to learn about some of the magic of Frank's work from studying his work, and that's what I did. So what I got from Frank, and I got a lot from Frank, I learned from studying his work. And I'll talk about some of the things that I like so much about studying his work. Was that he did a work that was so simple in composition, could be so powerful. Was coming up as a young artist. One of the pitfalls I think that many artists experience, young artists especially, is thinking that the more detail, the more work you put into something, the better results you're going to get. And what I learned from Frank, this ties in with what Frank Jr. was saying, that he could sit down in 4 hours, 5 hours, and turn out something that he didn't put a tremendous amount of work in it, but nevertheless the work was very powerful and very successful. And so that was for me, that was a lock to try to unlock the secret and the key of doing that. And I studied that from Frank, and I learned that from Frank. And then Frank's incredible color palette, which I think the only time I've ever seen something like that was Maxwell Parrish, and then there were a couple of the fantasy artists from the 18th century. Edmund Dulac was one who used this. I call it a French color palette. It's a watercolorist palette, but Frank was actually using it in oil paints, and N.C. Wyeth was using that same palette. But it's basically a way of taking the color that you really see when you look at something and substituting with something that's a lot more creative. And then Frank was a master of that. And so those are two things that I learned from him. And I'll talk about what I thought was my favorite work of Frank's. There was a series of projects that he did where they just gave him carte blanche, and they just said, we need a cover, here's what we need the cover by, you do whatever you want, and we'll publish the cover. And those were the covers for all the Warren magazines that he did. And I think the reason those were so strong, the reason those covers were so great, is because Frank got to do what he wanted rather than being tied down by directions from an art director. And so for me personally, the covers that sing the loudest to me are those covers that he did for the Warren publishing magazines.
Now, a lot of Frazetta fans are not particularly educated in art, so they couldn't speak to Frank, say, the way that Kenneth Smith or Arthur might speak to Frank. But on the occasions that Frank would get someone that could really go into some detail about it, he loves talking about the art. One time I was over there, and he said, we'd sat around in his den for a while, and chit-chat, and he says, well, you want to look at the paintings? I'm like, I've seen the paintings, Frank. He says, what? You don't want to look at the paintings? Yeah, Frank, yeah, let's look at the paintings. But, yeah, you could look at them every time, you'd find something different in them, and they're fabulous. But one of the things he said that I actually find is simply put, but is one of the higher points of his understanding of what he was doing and his goals and interests, is that he said it's very simple. I like to design interesting shapes, and then I make it a game to see if I can squeeze the figures that the illustration job need into the artistic shape that I'm interested in doing. Does that make sense? So he's balancing the commercial side of the art with his fine art, which is another way that when he got to do what he wanted from Warren more, that was another area where he got more creative.
One very interesting thing that Frank pointed out to me when I first started talking with him, and which I think anyone would be kind of enlightened by how his composition worked. He would create not just an interestingly posed figure, but he thought of these things in terms of a silhouette. So that just as if you were looking at the outline of a country on a map, the action of the ins and outs and the crags and the suggestive little tendrils and so forth. This figure was positioned against an immediate little background, which might be a cluster of other figures or trees or what have you. But there's the action which is there even in a flat silhouette. There's the action of that background and the action of the figure. And these things interact one with the other. Now, hearing him explain this, and you look at his paintings, you can see how he put this idea to very fertile use.
He just projected it. The only way I can explain it, he already had the picture done in his head. He'll try to search for his preliminaries or rough drafts of the paintings, and there's very few out there that are well rendered. He said simply because he just wanted to get the basis and the concept of the drawing. He didn't want to put a lot of time into it, he said, because then I'd have to do it again. He wanted to keep it fresh. It was simple as that. He said, in the first 15 minutes of any painting that he did, it was like half done in 15 minutes. Everything was on the canvas, including the shadows, facial features, just rough draft. That's how fast he did it. He'd rather play baseball or softball or stickball. And the downside to baseball, you needed 9 guys on each team. Stickball was one-on-one, and we could rotate if it was 3, and kind of automatics. But Silver Warrior, I walked in the studio on a Sunday. He was going to bring it in on Monday. And he wasn't one who would isolate himself from the family or the rest of the house where, don't bother Dad, he's painting. That's not who my dad was. He'd always have his door open so he could hear the family. Just, I think, a sense of security. He could oversee the family. So I walked in the studio and said, oh, geez, Dad, I know you're busy. He goes, what's up? I said, we're going to play stickball out in a few minutes. The guys are walking over from the mountains. Okay, I'll be right out. He goes, just make me a quick cup of coffee, quick. Make him a cup of coffee, and he'd be outside, ready to go. He'd be the first there and the last to leave, honest to God. He'd play until the moon starts coming up. I said, it's over. He goes, what do you mean it's over? We still got some light. I said, Dad, I can't see the ball. He goes, put the car lights on. I said, no, that's okay. But he was drafted for 2 years in 47 and 48 for the New York Giants to play center field. And they only offered him $3,000 to start. Now, just after that 51, he told me he was making $100 a day for Al Cap and Drew Abner, which is a ton of money back in 51. It's actually not bad for today, because of where you live. And then he got $250 for the Sunday pages. So, but he bashed those things out, he said, in an afternoon so he could have the rest of the week off. And that's why my mom called him lazy, which he wasn't. He just had such a vibrance for life. He wanted to live life to the fullest. It didn't matter what it was. He never had, through all his adversities and illnesses and thyroid disease and strokes, and he went through it. He never said, damn it. Once in a while he'd say, I wish I could use my right hand again, things of that nature. But his goal in life was, I'm going to say in his 50s, he wanted to, the latter part of his career, he wanted to do wildlife. And not your standard shots of a photograph of a lion or a tiger or a mountain lion or an eagle. He was going to get intense like he did everything else he's done in his career as far as fantasy illustration. And that kind of bummed him out. But other than that, yeah, the family and the grandchildren overrode the rest of it. But I mean, I can't say enough about my dad. It's not just because he's my dad. I'm sure everybody says it and has tender moments with their father. But my dad's, my relationship was so intense. And I never had closure, sadly, with my dad's passing because of the family dispute. But, and I feel him around me. There's no doubt he's here. I mean, there's things that happen in the museum. I know he's there. I mean, my mom, on the other end, is my dad always said she was a witch. And there's good witches and there's bad witches. I won't get into that. I don't know how strong that ceiling is against lightning. But anytime my mom would say something, it would happen. I don't want you guys going out tonight. Something's going to happen. My dad, what's going to happen? We'd pull out and track the trailer. We'd come by with the brakes went out in the dark right by us. Weird stuff like that. I want that tree in the front yard cut down. My dad goes, it's a beautiful maple tree. We're leaving it. Gets hit by lightning and falls over the next day. It's like, my dad goes, don't get on her bad side. But he said of all the people, and he was very athletic. I said, I know I've said to him, I'm sure people asked him as well, what would have happened if he would have chosen the career as far as baseball, what we would have sadly been neglected of. You know, the artwork and how many people's lives he's touched. And not only other artists who respect him, I respect him as an artist, respect him as a father, respect him as a person. We received so many letters that you just want to cry, that you hear how he had touched people's lives and saved people's lives that he never understood. He was very modest. He understood how good his talent was. I miss him dearly, but back to the aspect of where he was, if he would have picked the baseball career, he said it was still in his blood and he still would have doodled on the buses and whatever it was, plane trips and things like that. But people wrote us letters about in jail cells saying that were molested or raped in prison, and the only reason they didn't hang themselves or kill themselves is because they'd take my dad's book, his art, and go into the bed or hide in a closet in the house or wherever it might be to escape reality. And it just heartfelt. It's like, you know, you don't realize how lucky we are, regardless how bad our life could be at times, how some individuals just suffer. You know, I've done things in my life that were totally against what I was brought up to do, and I regret it and I resent it and I have so much guilt over it, but I have to sooner or later let it go. But because I have a conscience, I deal with it. But you know, so many people that are hurt. I mean, I didn't have a silver platter. I mean, my dad busted my ass like we bought an estate. It was an old farm, and I had to work on the farm like a farmer except for the cows. I mean, I sat there with trees, cutting trees and barbed wire and carrying cement upstairs to build a, back pool or whatever it was. So I wasn't catered to. My dad was Sicilian, and I had guidelines to follow, and you better follow them. I mean, he wouldn't beat us, but it was just the thought of it. So that was my deterrent. I mean, he always told me, he goes, when you find out you're doing drugs, he goes, I'll break every bone in your body. That's all it took. I mean, that's all it was. But
How was he at stickball? How was he?
My dad? Oh, he was drafted to play professional baseball. He threw over 100 miles an hour without a doubt. I mean, I was drafted when I was 19 to play, not professional yet, but for Kansas City Royals. And not my prime, I mean, I wasn't a big guy yet. I mean, I got much a little later, but my dad was as good as me, and he was in his 50s. He was faster, he could throw harder, he could hit further, but I was a little more scientific. If it came down to raw ability, physical strength, my dad was a white Bo Jackson, or Bo Jackson was a white Frank Frazetta. I mean, nothing would stop him. If he put his mind to it, it was as simple as that. It was done. I mean, he wasn't mechanically inclined because he had no interest to do that. No interest. I mean, I wrote a book about him back in 2014 or 13 that I have on the table. And it was just life stories about my dad and I growing up together. And it was so touching. My dad would call me up. He had no clue to mechanical things or wires and wiring TV sets. He said, hey, could you come over and help me with the TV? I said, what happened? I moved the wire on the VCR. So I go over there and say, what the hell did you do, Pop? Wires are everywhere. So I said, well, you got to take this one to this one in, this one goes to out. And I get it in, so I plug it in, the TV, the screen would come on, he goes, how the hell do you know how to do that? So we have to follow in, out. You know, I grew up in a time, you know, during the Depression, there wasn't anything there. I mean, and I don't think there'll ever be another Frazetta, not because just of his raw ability and his God-gifted talent, but because I believe this generation today is being overwhelmed and rightfully stripped from their way to express themselves because of computers and cell phones.
All right.
My dad, I mean, he was fearless. He said he's seen Conan's in his lifetime. He was invited to become part of the film, the original Conan with Milas, I guess the producer or director. And he was for it. He wasn't against it at all. But when they said it was Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he has nothing against Arnold because he was great in some movies, he said, but he's a weightlifter. He's not a guy who's been swinging axes and swords. You know, if you're going to make him lose about 80 pounds, he goes, it's a possibility, but he's not the guy. He picked Charles Bronson, William Smith, guys of that nature. They have to be lean. They have to be physical, because they have to be, agile as well. And as far as Fire and Ice goes, the film he did with Ralph Bakshi, he did just about every stunt in that film. Stuntmen couldn't do it. He said, no disrespect, Mr. Rhoda, but I can't do that. He'd do it. So it was fun to see my dad. I mean, but every day of his life was lived to the fullest. Cup of coffee, camera, TV, and family, and that's it. That's it.
One of the huge reasons why Frank did the violence and the physicality of his work was so convincing, because he was physical. If you're physical and you do this kind of stuff, you understand how the brain works, how the muscles move, contract, relax, and you understand the dynamics. If you're not physical, how would you fucking know? And what happens is either otherwise people can still do like action. It's not convincing because there's something there. There's no spirit or real soul coming from it. You know what I mean? And I think also this whole thing about being physical and doing a drawing and going away and doing something physical, because it's like you have an excess of energy. And it takes you need that expel the energy because it's like a fight. It's like a kind of war, you know what I mean? So when you do something so silly, so quiet, so quaint in a way, because you got to remember, Frank's work was extremely violent, and it had this romance in there, that subtlety and the beauty in it as well, and that poetry all at the same time. And I think he was a physical guy, because he would have been in the old days, he would have had an axe probably, and would done some more, like I said, more physical. So yeah, it's an expelling. It's like the pot boiling, and you've got to release the steam. I ain't got much to say, but it's a privilege hanging out with you guys. Anyway, thanks.
I'd like to add that if you don't mind. One quick thing if you don't mind. We had a couple of young artists come into the museum, and my dad walked in. And my dad, I think another thing that separates him from a lot of people is the height of the moment.
I'm mocking myself always.
He catches the height of the moment. I mean, if you sat there with a movie camera and stopped this still, he got it at the most dynamic, powerful moment. And somebody came into the museum and said, "This was there. It's such a pleasure." He goes, "I love all that blood and gore in your art." He said, "Excuse me?" He goes, "Man, the power and the gore." He goes, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "It's just a suggestion." He goes, "Well, give me an example." He goes, "Sure, sure." And the guy goes, "For this one, you have something in his mind like the Destroyer." He remember, the blood and the gore. He goes, "Right here." He goes, "Oh, okay." He went to the next one. What's this one? I think, no, it's just because my dad would take it to a point to where the mind would fill in the blank. And that's as simple as you see some of his early paintings of women. There's no nose, a little lip, a cheekbone. It's like unfinished, but your mind fills it in. He said that's what we have to do. The mind will take it to the next step. And what his art does, you look at it and you're so overwhelmed and captivated by it. You see, like I said, you see so much in his art. I see the same paintings every day doing tours with my wife. And Indomitable, you look at it 1,000 times and you'll see things you didn't even know were there. Because you're so overwhelmed to be pulled in. He said, "I have a focal point for you to look at." And he draws you into that. He said, "I can refine this art to look like a photograph, but if I want that, I'll take a photograph." So he refines what's important, and the rest of it blends out and fades out into whatever. The castle in the background, just a suggestion of it. There's no windows, no bricks, no windows. You're focus is not important. He doesn't want your eyes go from what he wants you to see to that side, or back and forth. And like you said, there is a dynamic spectrum. Everything has a composition, and he works within it. Here he has a concept in the shape, whether it be vertical and horizontal, whether it be spiral or sphere, whatever. That he has a certain way that he puts the figures inside it. The Princess of Mars, is it Princess of Mars? The guy's holding the sword up with the planet behind it. Planet, nice perfect circle, the sword's straight, but at the end of the sword, he put a little curve in it, just for the curve to follow the same contour. And those are little things you don't pick up. And I just saw a wonderful article somebody wrote from 25 years ago, no, 10 years ago actually, that described his process that I've never understood. And I'll probably put it on the website. I can't type that fast, but I'll put it on there. And just to see how I don't know how this guy knew this. I'm going to be talking to my dad, but he hit it right on the head. And another woman said she became anorexic until she looked at a Frazetta painting and realized these women are not perfect. They're voluptuous. They've got little bellies. They've got firm butts, big breasts, and they've got the delicate, soft little face. And she goes, and now when she gets a little overweight, she looks at a Frazetta painting and it brings her back to reality. Because perfection is not what it's all about. Nobody's perfect. We don't know that. We like to think that. We don't want to be perfect.
Questions? Anybody else have a question?
I'm just curious if you were talking about Parrish and Wyeth earlier. What were Frank's influences? Did he ever study? Who were his heroes?
My understanding is he studied with Falanga, and he used to go through the life drawing classes with Al and with Angelo Therese.
Okay.
He did a lot of that. I've seen a lot of that work. In fact, I think I own a couple of them. A couple of those life drawings. I bought them from you. But they're very nice. They're really beautiful. Yeah, so he did his study. There's nobody that does work like Frank. That's solid, and that's where things are that correct that have not put in their studies. And so I think the things that separate, these guys used to be called the Flegels, those three guys, because they used to go to all the life drawing classes together. So Angelo Therese, Al Williamson, and Frank. If you look at this, especially their ink work, their comic work, there are a lot of commonalities, and one commonality in particular with all of them is that they're really well schooled. I mean, they're really solid. So they know how to draw everything. They know how to draw, a car, a cat, a dog, whatever it is. And the guys were really solid at really drawing. Solid education, and it showed up in their work.
Apropos of what Frank Jr. was saying, I think if we go back to those famous Funnies covers that Frazetta did in the late 50s, you can see the lines outlining the figures that just vanish for a good part of the curve of the muscles. And your mind fills that in. Just as when you look at an actual human being, you don't see lines. You see highlights. You see mass. You see something sculptural. But to give me what he accomplished already in those early drawings is kind of sculptural drawing that just impress the socks out of me. His ability to make you appreciate how much there is that is just suggested in reality. It's not all spelled out.
Let's hear it for these guys.